One of the biggest stories this week has been the Bank of England's decision to hike interest rates for the 14th time, isn't it? Is it yet another bid to get inflation under control? And the latest forecasts from the bank say the UK will avoid recession, will it? In more good news for the Prime Minister, the bank said it expects the government to meet its promise to halve inflation by the end of the year. Now, joining me now is former advisor to the Bank of England, Roger Gewolb, and Chief Economic Advisor for the Centre for Economic Business Research, Vicky Price. Vicky, lovely to join you. Lovely to have you on the show today. Thank you very much for joining us. And Robert, thank you very much for joining us as well. Now, what do we make, coming to you first, Vicky, if I may, what do we make of this latest interest rate rise?
Well, I think the Bank of England had no choice but to increase interest rates by 25 basis points. The reason for that is that the markets expected it, and also that the Federal Reserve in the US and also the European Central Bank had done exactly that the previous week. So they had to do it. Now, the question is whether it's necessary to have this extra rise, which of course, could mean quite a lot for mortgages. But the interesting thing, nevertheless, is that the mortgage market had already anticipated it. It had already started discounting some of the extra increases that we're going to see, and we've seen some reductions in those mortgage rates, which is good news. So you were talking about good news before in terms of growth for the economy. So perhaps we can add that. The only problem about the growth of the economy issue is that we are indeed talking about slightly better, 0.5% this year, but again, just 0.5% next year. And after that, the Bank of England seems to think that growth will be even less than that. So we're not talking about a particularly vibrant economy, I'm afraid, and those interest rate increases contribute to that.
It's not sounding very positive, is it? Roger, the analysts are actually predicting interest rates could go as high as 6%, and if they fall at all, it will not be until next year.
Well, Dawn, I'm with respect to Vicky, I'm not buying any of this. This is all very sort of dry macroeconomic stuff. When I'm sitting at home opening my envelope and finding that my mortgage has gone up another 150 quid, this all means nothing to me. The fact that the market has expected it, the fact that Mr. Bailey wants to slavishly follow the United States, which is totally different than us. One, they have their own energy. Two, they're curbing consumer spending, which we don't have, which is why their inflation is halved and is now 3%. Means really very little to me. I think they did it because they're stuck in a rut. I mean, but can you imagine a football manager on their 14th game, or a general in the Ukraine attacking the 14th town for the same town for the 14th time with the same battle plan? No, it's just that this stuff is all so dry that people fall asleep and don't get up in arms as they would if it were football, for example. I think they're stuck in a rut, and they just have to keep saying they're fighting inflation. But the kind of inflation we have does not come down by raising interest rates. So it just hurts us even more. And if you will let me, when we next have a moment, I'd like to make a prediction about what I think is actually going on here.
OK, go on, make the prediction now. Go on.
We have, as of this rate change yesterday, this increase, gone beyond the pale, beyond the pale, beyond the pale. The arrogance, the stubbornness, when everybody, including perhaps God himself, have told the Bank of England not to raise rates anymore because it's doing no good. Everything in this country, I mean, Mr. Sunak is in Disneyland, a place that he's probably enjoying immensely, I'm sure. We've got the migrants, we've got the NHS, we've got tax like no other country. We've got 900% profits for the terrible British gas. Cost of living crisis, strikes. We've got everything going on. Electricity, they won't even decouple it from the gas price, which it has very little to do with. And if they did, the experts say our gas bills would drop by £1,500. This government, over the last 15 years, has shot itself in the foot so many times. My prediction, Dawn, is that they are at a stage now where things are so desperate. And I was going to add that on the other side, you've got what Boris calls the human bollard, Keir Starmer, who needs to do nothing other than stand there and wait for power to be delivered into his hands. But I've got to say, if they let Tony Blair get involved, that's a whole new dimension. There will be some rationality, there will be some imagination, there will be some balance. I know a lot of people don't like Tony, but I've got a lot of admiration for him, and I think it will work out very well. But I think that the prediction is that Mr. Sunak and his colleagues are going to delay the general election until 2039, if they can.
Yeah, well, that's
as long as they can, so that things right themselves, and then they will try to claim credit for it, none of which they deserve.
Vicky, unfortunately, we're running out of time. It's such a huge subject. So who is to blame for this? I mean, you know, as Roger's just alluded, there is an element of panic in the way the Bank of England are reacting by putting interest rates up constantly when it doesn't seem to be solving the problem. Who is to blame? Is it the Bank of England or is it the government?
I think there's been an issue about inflationary expectations, which have been increasing quite significantly in the UK by comparison to everywhere else. So what we've seen in other countries is inflation has come down very significantly, and that is because cost pressures in terms of wage pressures have not been anything like as high. So governments intervened a lot earlier in terms of supporting energy prices downwards. They've intervened in terms of supporting food prices downwards. We seem to be very, very slow in doing that. We raised inflationary expectations. So there is a lot of cost push right now coming from wages, which we're not seeing anywhere else, and that's the real issue, I think, and that's why the Bank of England, in some ways, has to react and perhaps is overreacting, despite the fact it actually started raising rates before anyone else. We raised rates in the UK in December 21. The US didn't start doing it until March 22, and the European Central Bank not until the summer of 22. So you can't blame the bank for this, because they did react, but of course they were facing, you know, quite a lot of difficult issues ahead of them.
Vicky Price, thank you very much for joining us, and Roger Gewolb as well on the, frankly, quite depressing interest rate situation, which is going to cost an awful lot more money for a lot of people. People coming off fixed-rate mortgages face an additional repayment of about £3,000 a year. So good luck if you're in that bracket.